All right, we have no questions this week, so we'll go ahead and go right into the book. We have a new file, so hopefully you have found the new file and will be able to read along. It just got put up a few minutes ago. So we are beginning on page 31. If you remember correctly from last week, we were in the middle of the paragraph when we stopped. So, I think I will go back to the beginning of the paragraph and we'll read through and then pick up the discussion in the middle. Now remember, on page 30, we began a long quote from a book by Marjorie Green called The Knower and the Known, I believe. Yes. And that was talking about the Cartesian dualism, Cartesian Newtonian worldview. That puts objective matter in a separate category from subjective matter. And Levis obviously does not appreciate this dualism. So I'll begin reading with the words, "It may be deduced from the tone," on page 31. And if you have any thoughts or questions, please send them in. It may be deduced from the tone of this that Marjorie Green's book differs fundamentally from the history of Western philosophy of Bertrand Russell, whose basic assumptions about the nature of objectivity confirm the confidence so patent in Andreski that his own need no defense. I mention the history of Western philosophy because I have known experienced and energetic students, men of senior status attending my seminars, who, having prescribed for themselves a better acquaintance with that background of philosophic thought which they have realized to be an essential element in literary history, had, they confessed, embarked on a perusal of at least immediately relevant stretches of Russell's large volume. The word confessed registers the fact that they came out with this avowal in response to my telling a group that people in their position hadn't time to discover for themselves how little the energy spent on Russell's history could bring them of the insight, understanding, and stimulus to thought that they needed. Of course, as I told my seminars, The Knower and the Known, a much smaller book, gets its coherence, and with this its pregnancy and its effective range, by having for its directing and informing spirit the profound conviction expressed in the introduction, the conviction that the Cartesian Newtonian dualism must be exorcised from the Western mind. Now, I'm going to break here because this is where we stopped last week. And I want to say that this idea that the Cartesian Newtonian dualism must be exorcised from the Western mind is a very large and important idea, especially in Olavo's enterprise. I think I mentioned last week that in my education, this dualism was so implicit in everything I learned that I never questioned it. It was part of my worldview. It was part of the basic assumptions that I brought to the table in any discussion. To me, it was obvious that there was a difference, a fundamental difference, between facts, which meant objective, concrete, something that could be measured and touched, something that had material existence. That was considered factual, as opposed to ideas or something that could be considered a moral truth or a belief. The moral truth, the belief, the idea was subjective and probably had no objective reality. It was probably just something made up, arbitrarily set up by man. Just like the length of an inch was 12 inches to a foot and 3 feet to a yard. To me, that was clearly arbitrary, and ideas were also arbitrary. They were constructed by the human mind without independent existence out in the universe somewhere. When Olavo said that he believed that Newton and Galileo and all of the scientists who originated this thought, when Olavo said he thought those scientists were misguided and confused and flat out wrong, philosophically wrong and objectively wrong, I was shocked. It was as though Olavo was saying that gravity doesn't exist, as the law of gravity with the apple falling on the scientist's head, aha, we have gravity. It was as though Olavo was challenging the idea that the earth is round and suggesting that, in fact, the earth is flat. So, for me, I identify with the word that Levis chooses here when he says that this Cartesian Newtonian dualism must be exercised. Exorcised from the Western mind. Exorcised usually relates to demons, demonic possession. When a demon has a hold on a human being in the relationship of possession, the demon controls the human being completely. All thought, everything is controlled by this foreign personality. And the only way to get rid of it is to cast it out, to exorcise it. Well, this way of looking at reality, this Cartesian Newtonian dualism, has such a grip on the Western mind that it is very difficult for us to question it or to see anything in any other way, unless it is just cast out and put aside. And Olavo is very good at explaining how bankrupt and incorrect this way of perceiving things is. And Levis also wanted to put this idea in the crosshairs, so that it could be blasted out of existence. Okay, if I am using any language that you don't understand, please send it in, because I am using a lot of imagery and idiomatic language here. So, let us move on. But I want to point out that this last sentence, the conviction that the Cartesian Newtonian dualism must be exorcised from the Western mind, is a theme that we will be talking about for the next few paragraphs. Also, before I move on, I want to remind you of this idea that the senior students, men of high intelligence and maturity, thought that the book, The History of Western Philosophy, would be essential to their understanding literary history. Levis and probably Marjorie Green, but Levis especially, believed that this book, The History of Western Philosophy, would not be helpful because, in part, it is steeped in this worldview, this modernistic worldview with its unexamined assumptions. And so it is not helpful to those who would like to understand true philosophy. In order to understand the philosophical background of literary history, we must bear in mind, keep reminding ourselves that this dualism is a blinder that is put on to people by our philosophic history, and we must take it off and be aware that although many hold these kinds of ideas, yet they are seriously flawed philosophically and, in fact, incorrect. Okay. So, Levis recommends Marjorie Green's The Knower and the Known as a important book to help modern philosophers take off the glasses of the Newtonian Cartesian dualism. So maybe sometime we can study some of that book directly. We'll see. All right, I'm going to move on. I'm starting in the middle of the paragraph after the words Western mind. This is the part that we begin with this week. We ended at Western mind last week. Okay. This, I judge, means that the book will give the literary student the kind of help he needs. Russell's book certainly won't. It is, I have insisted, highly desirable that a department of philosophy should be one of those co-present with English in the university, but however beneficial criticism and advice from that department and the possibility or probability of criticism may be, it seems to me in the highest degree unlikely that the philosophic criticism or advice will bring me to see Marjorie Green as mischievously fallacious or, for my purpose, anything but irreplaceable. Okay. So he was speaking of how useless the history of Western philosophy would be to a serious student of literary history. And in the scope of the book, we understand that a study of literary history is actually of literature itself, historic literature, is itself foundational to a good education and to an educated mind. So, if you're studying literature, you might also need to understand the ideas, the climate of ideas out of which that literature came. So, reasonable men began to study the history of Western philosophy by Bertrand Russell. Levis said that that was a waste of time, and that rather it would be better for them to read The Knower and the Known by Marjorie Green, which is smaller and gets its coherence, which means it intellectually hangs together. Its unifying thread is the idea that this Cartesian Newtonian dualism must be exorcised from the Western mind. Okay. This, I judge, means that the book will give the literary student the kind of help he needs. So, what kind of help does the literary student need? He needs help exercising this unexamined assumption which colors all philosophic thought for the last 100 or 200 years. So, that book will give the literary student the help he needs in understanding reality, which is the ultimate goal of studying literature, to enable us to perceive reality as it really is, not some mathematical construct generated by measurement, and then they say that's all it is. That is not what reality is. Reality is what we perceive directly with our own eyes, ears, taste, touch, and vicariously by reading literature, we experience for ourselves the range of human experiences and emotions that are beyond the limits of our own personal experience. Okay, so that is reality. And the literary student needs help to blast out of the narrow confines of objective reality that have been set up arbitrarily by scientific minds of the past. Okay, so this, I judge, means that the book will give the literary student the kind of help he needs. Russell's book certainly won't. It is, I have insisted, highly desirable that a department of philosophy should be one of those co-present with English. But, so let's stop there. Levis says, yes, we want a department of philosophy in the university, handy, able to be dialogued with, so that their input can enrich the literary student. And the literary student can also be enriched by arguing and refuting the input of the philosophy department. So it is highly desirable that this department exist in the university. And when he says co-present, he is emphasizing that it is in a collegial relationship, not as the expert informing in an authoritative manner the English department. So, co-present emphasizes the equality of status. and legitimacy. Okay, so Department of Philosophy should be one of those, one of many, co-present with English. But, however beneficial criticism and advice from that department and the possibility or probability of criticism may be, it occurs to me to question what the word beneficial is modifying. Is Levis saying, we have to look forward in the sentence to find this out? However beneficial may be, it seems to me, and I feel like, okay. All right. The word beneficial could have been modifying criticism. He could have been speaking of beneficial criticism. If he were doing that, then beneficial criticism and advice would be the subject of the clause. I do not believe that's it. I believe this is the structure of the sentence. I'm going to get rid of extra words to find the essential thread. Okay? Okay, beginning with the first portion of the sentence, he is saying, it is highly desirable that philosophy should be co-present with English. Okay? It is desirable, meaning we want this, okay, it is desirable for philosophy to be co-present with English. That is proposition number one. But, now we know, but will be a conjunction which brings together two things which are saying the opposite. Okay, now the next phrase is, and this is where I became confused, but now I think I understand it well. But, however beneficial criticism and advice from that department may be, it seems to me in the highest degree unlikely that philosophic criticism will bring me to see that Marjorie Green is fallacious. Okay, it is desirable for philosophy to be there, but I'm going to paraphrase so you see the main idea. But, however good this may be, it will not convince me that Marjorie Green is wrong. Okay, that is the main idea. It is desirable for philosophy containing all of its wrong ideas about reality, all of its skewed thinking, all of its blindness concerning the nature of reality. In spite of all of that, yet it is still desirable for it to be present, co-present with English, yet, or but, however good this may be, it's not going to convince me that Marjorie Green is wrong. Marjorie Green says that philosophy is all washed up. Marjorie Green is a critic of the standard philosophical ideas which were accepted widely by the entire philosophic world for the last couple of hundred years. Marjorie Green says it is totally wrong, and Olavo agrees it is totally wrong. These people are wrong. So, Levis is saying, no matter how much good can come out of philosophy for the English student, it will never be good enough to convince me that Marjorie Green isn't even more valuable. In other words, we believe Marjorie Green is right and the philosophy experts are wrong. Yet we want them there so that we can have discussion. We want to debate and we want to be enriched by considering their ideas, but we want to consider them with the blinders off. We want to consider them with clear eyes so that we can see that reality is actually perceived directly by the individual human being and is not arbitered by scientific experts who claim the sole right to define reality according to their measurements. Okay, do you see? So, understanding that this is the main idea, let's reread the sentence and glean the extra stuff from the words that were left out and see what all the extra clauses mean. Okay. All right, this I judge means that the book will give the literary student the kind of help he needs. Russell's book certainly won't. It is, I have insisted, highly desirable. Okay, I have insisted means I have said it over and over again in the past, forcefully, even though nobody agrees with me maybe. I have insisted that that philosophy and many other disciplines ought to be co-present with English in the university. English being the liaison center of a lively conversation between all the disciplines in which we relate as equals. Okay, I have insisted that it is highly desirable that a department of philosophy should be one of those co-present with English. But, however beneficial criticism and advice from that department may be, let's put the may be with the phrase it belongs with. Okay, however beneficial criticism and advice from that department may be, and the possibility or probability of criticism may be. Okay, now, this, however beneficial it may be, I believe is modifying two things. So let's look at what it's modifying. Okay. However beneficial criticism and advice may be, criticism and advice, however beneficial these things may be, and then he goes on to break out and the possibility or probability of criticism may be. So we have to take this, however beneficial, and mentally add it to the new idea. However beneficial, the possibility probability of criticism may be. Right? Okay. Do you remember several weeks ago, a long time ago, we talked about the word criticism, and we said it had two meanings. One is literary criticism, where you're simply providing intellectual feedback. That's one definition. Another definition is for a person to say to another, you are wrong, you are bad. There's something wrong with the way you're doing things. That's a different kind of criticism. Okay? Two different meanings. I believe he's using both of them here. I think that he's saying, however beneficial criticism and advice from the philosophy department may be, and in this sense, intellectual feedback, okay, in a collegial intellectual banter where each party is seeking truth and each party is representing their own take on reality, and they're going back and forth enriching one another. Okay, however beneficial that may be with the philosophy department. And then the possibility or probability, however beneficial the possibility, probability, really, inevitability. Inevitability. Inevitable. That means when something cannot be escaped. It will almost certainly happen, and it's kind of bad. It has a negative connotation. The possibility of criticism in the negative sense, where the philosophy department will say, the English students are wrong, they are naive, they are stupid, they are provincial, they are not sophisticated, they are not philosophically deep, they are wrong. Okay, that kind of criticism may also be beneficial in some kind of a way. I think that's what he's saying with this breakout. However beneficial criticism and advice, the possibility, probability, and I add inevitability of criticism may be. Okay, and all that's the first half. However good it is to have philosophy, comma, it seems to me in the highest degree unlikely that philosophic criticism or advice will bring me to see Marjorie Green as mischievously fallacious or, for my purpose, anything but irreplaceable. Okay, so there's a lot of language there, a lot of vocabulary. You do know what it means because I told you a few minutes ago. But basically, the last portion of this sentence is his conclusion. However beneficial philosophy, having the philosophical students and the philosophical department around may be, yet it will not convince me. Okay, now how does he say that? It seems to me, so that is talking about his sense of perception. It's not fact, it's just what he thinks. It seems to me, in the highest degree, unlikely. So, it is unlikely. It is very unlikely. It is infinitely unlikely. It definitely will not happen that philosophic criticism or advice will bring me to see, that means will bring him around to a perception, that means it will convince him. Okay? It is unlikely that philosophic criticism or advice will convince Levis that Marjorie Green is mischievously fallacious. Fallacious, I think you know, means wrong, that her thinking is wrong, she is mistaken. And mischievously, similar to perniciously, wrong in a way that will be important and serious and very negative in its effect. Okay? Mischievous is a bad thing in this context. Mischievously fallacious. Not just innocently mistaken, but mischievously fallacious means she's doing harm. Okay? But remember, it's unlikely that Levis will be convinced that Marjorie Green is mischievously fallacious. So that means Levis will never think that she is bad. It's unlikely he would ever think that. Or, for my purpose, anything but irreplaceable. So, it is unlikely that Levis could be convinced that Marjorie Green is anything other than irreplaceable. In other words, Levis believes Marjorie Green is irreplaceable. Nothing can replace the cogency, the intellectual clarity, the light she shines on the clouds that cloud our eyes philosophically when we think of these things. She is a necessity. Her ideas are a necessity for the philosophic student who wants to rid himself of this Cartesian-Newtonian dualism. So, in the last looking at this sentence, we understand that it is in the highest degree unlikely that philosophic criticism or advice will ever bring Levis to see Marjorie Green as mischievously fallacious, or, for his purposes, as anything other than irreplaceable. She cannot be replaced. All right, I am going to just read this without commentary now, and I think you will understand every word, I hope. Beginning one sentence back from last week. Of course, as I told my seminars, The Knower and the Known, a much smaller book, gets its coherence and with this its pregnancy and effective range by having, for its directing and informing spirit, the profound conviction expressed in the introduction, the conviction that the Cartesian-Newtonian dualism must be exorcised from the Western mind. This, I judge, means that the book will give the literary student the kind of help he needs. Russell's book certainly won't. It is, I have insisted, highly desirable that a department of philosophy should be one of those co-present with English. But, however beneficial criticism and advice from that department, and the possibility or probability of criticism may be, it seems to me in the highest degree unlikely that philosophic criticism or advice will bring me to see Marjorie Green as mischievously fallacious, or, for my purpose, anything but irreplaceable. So, if you have no questions, we'll move on to the next paragraph. she makes it plain that Russell's attempt to produce statements of fact while avoiding words by which substances, rather than direct and particular percepts, would be suggested, is absurd. Quote, "But can any names, such as the general quality words red, feline, colored, etc., of which he is trying to build his firmly factual language, work uniquely for this percept? Both the words themselves and the things designated are instances of universals. The same word, example, cat, designates the same thing, cat, in the sense that a mark or sound of the same class designates a thing of the same class. But no occasion of cat or cat is identical with any other. It is in each case a similar occurrence or object. How do I know that it is similar, and similar enough to be subsumed under the same class? By memory, a Humean empiricist would say. But even granting that, meeting cat number 2, I recall cat number 1. Wait a second. Even granting that meeting cat number 2, I recall cat number 1, I must make the comparison. I must liken cat number 2 to cat number 1 and find them similar by a standard which is the concept cat. I do not mean to suggest that there is an explicit or even an unconscious inference involved here. Every time I recognize a cat as a cat, okay. But as my world is colored, so too it is cat inhabited, and at the same time structured through language. I dwell in a coherent and mutually interacting framework of word classes and thing classes. Only within such a frame do individual sounds or written shapes and individual animals become what they are. The power to generalize which speech demands is power to sort out according to effective norms, both utterances and natural events. Okay. First, I want to point out something which is a foundational understanding of logic. Okay, it's talking about the ways of understanding a word. We can understand the word cat verbally, and we can understand the word cat with respect to its meaning in the real world, and we can understand the word cat according to its ideal or abstract sense. Okay, so this one refers to C-A-T, and I could speak of it as a word with 3 letters, with a short vowel sound in the middle, with a consonant-vowel-consonant structure, which rhymes with the word bat and the word sat, which begins with a hard k sound. So I'm speaking of the word in English as a list of letters and as a group. Okay. I am not speaking of its meaning at all. I'm speaking of it in its phenomena verbally. On the other hand, I could be speaking about my cat that actually walks around my house and jumps on my table and puts fur into my air in my house. Or I could be comparing it to Olavo's cat or the cat on the street. I'm talking about real individual furball, breathing, drinking, meowing animals. Okay? These cats are walking around in the world. Or I could speak of the category cat, which is almost a Platonic conception of the form of cat in my mind. Now, when we are reading this quote, this is enclosed in quotation marks like this. This one is what Marjorie Green is. These two are the ones Marjorie Green is mainly talking about. It's not until the very end when she starts talking about the standard let's see. There's another word, I don't see it right now. But basically the standard class, norm, or class. She doesn't even use the word cat there. She speaks of standards and norms and classes, of all of the animals that fall into a class that we think of as cats. Okay? When she's speaking of that, she's speaking of cat in this sense. Okay? But most of the paragraph, when she uses the word cat as a word, a verbal utterance, she puts it like this. And when she leaves it without, she's talking about real furballs, real ones that exist objectively in the world. Okay, so let's look at it again. But, well, let's see. Let me make sure there's nothing we have to say about Levis's writing at the beginning. She makes it plain that Russell's attempt to produce statements of fact while avoiding words by which substances, rather than direct and particular percepts, would be suggested is absurd. So Russell is trying to live by his own arbitrarily set up rule of dichotomy. Olavo told me that Russell was very fascinated with the idea of creating a scientific language, and then Wittgenstein took this on as well and took it further. The idea of a language which would be truly explicit would have to omit concepts that are inherently subjective and without objective measurable quality. So he would want only what he would consider primary characteristics to be to have the words. The secondary is they're trying to exclude. So Marjorie Green is pointing out how absurd in actual practice it is to try to create a language and to communicate anything in our real world that is so constrained by this dichotomy that you're not even allowed to name things that aren't considered to be of primary reality, which they consider primary reality only that which can be measured, and that does not include the ideal, the intelligible form recognition, intelligible form recognition. So Russell would contend that intelligible form doesn't exist. And Hume would say that the only reason I recognize my cat as a cat is because sometime when I was a small child, I saw something that looked like it, and my mother said, "That's a cat." And I'm remembering something I learned, and I'm comparing this cat to that cat, but that I'm not recognizing an intelligible form. That's what they say. Which Marjorie Green and Levis and Olavo believes is totally false, philosophically. Okay, so into the quote. But Can any names refer to intelligible forms? They also refer to classes or to categories of things. Category is another good word. Categories of objects. Can any names, such as the general quality words red, feline, colored, etc., which all delineate what they call secondary characteristics, those which are not measurable, supposedly, of which he is trying to build his firmly factual language, factual meaning objective. Can any names, such as general quality words, red, feline, colored, etc., of which he's trying to build his firmly factual language, work uniquely for this percept? Percept is an item of perception, a unit of perception. Both the words themselves and the thing they delineate are instances of universals. Okay, the universal is the intelligible form, it is the norm, it is the standard. Universal is what is in everybody's head. The ideal cat, the standard cat, the normal cat, the proto-cat. They would deny it exists. But she's saying it's a universal. Just like red is a universal in people's minds. If I say red to you, to each of the students watching this, it will conjure in your mind a color. Then, if I hold up this red, you'll say, oh yes, that red is a little bit light, lighter than the red I was thinking of. Or this red is a little bit cooler. My red had more yellow, more orange in it. Or, yes, I wasn't thinking of that red, but I see that that's red. You have a red in your mind, which is more or less close to this, unless you're colorblind. And this is an instance of a whole category, a whole spectrum of colors, which you would recognize as red, but which are not exactly the same. And in your mind, there is actually one prototype. And this is how it is for cat, or for colored, or for tastes like salty, or bitter, or sour. Okay, these names, which delineate general qualities, you need a word for it, but any individual case of it is an instance of a universal. So the universal is a long thing. The same word, i.e. cat, designates the same thing, cat, in the sense that a mark or sound of that same class delineates a thing of the same class. But no occasion of cat or cat is identical with any other. Okay, so if I say cat, and if I say cot, but you recognize in my accent that I meant the furry thing, well then my cot will still be cat. Or if I say cat, I have 3 cats. Cat is also cat, which is also cot. So we say it in different ways, but we recognize it to be the same word. And we recognize different individuals, which are different, to be in some sense the same, although they are not identical. It is in each case a similar occurrence or object. How do I know that it is similar? And similar enough to be subsumed under the same class. Okay, I say cat and cot. How do you know that that's similar? And how do you know if it's similar enough? Supposing I said cat and Kate. Is that similar enough? That is no more different. Cat and Kate. Okay, we have cat, cat. I pronounced something more like cat. Now that, in English, is approaching cot. A cot is a bed, a small bed. The word I said, cot, is halfway from cat to cot. So if I say cot, what am I saying? Am I saying my cot has fleas? Or am I saying my cot is soft and comfortable? Okay. How similar does it have to be? Suppose I say Kate. In English, Kate is a girl's name. How about if I could make it sound close. It could be here. It can be here. What makes it similar enough? From a linguistic perspective, the delineations are firmly set in infancy by the mother tongue phonology. It's created in our brain. The mother, the little child points to a cat and says, cat, cat. And the mother says, yes, dear, cat, cat. And the baby fixes it. They go from here up to here in their pronunciation because the mother heard something in between and corrected it, thus creating a paradigm in the brain. And that paradigm exists objectively for the native speaker of any given language. So there exists objectively a norm. And the closer you can partially, of course, get by context, but I could say my cot has fleas, and it could be the cat or it could be the cot. If the cat slept on the cot with fleas, they both would have fleas. So in context, you can't always tell. So what I'm saying is there is a norm, and the brain places what it hears in a category. And in the same way, there is a norm of what it means to be a cat. And an animal which is very similar in size and shape and appearance, maybe a small dog or maybe another small animal, you recognize it and you know it's not a cat. No matter how much it looks like a cat, you can tell that's a dog. Okay? So this ideal, this standard, this norm exists. Okay, so in each case, an individual is a similar occurrence. But how do I know that it is similar and similar enough to be subsumed into the same class? How do I know it doesn't have to go to a different class? How similar does it have to be? Okay. By memory, a Humean empiricist would say, and everybody knows Hume, and everybody knows what an empiricist would say. A scientist who's into this measurement thing would say, no paradigm exists, you're just remembering one you saw before. But even granting that. Now, grant means to concede, to say, yes, for the sake of this argument, we will say that what you are saying is true, even though I don't really agree, maybe. But if we give in on this point, even granting that meeting cat number 2, I recall cat number 1. I must make the comparison. So even if the Humean empiricist is correct that I in fact do remember other cats that I have seen, perhaps from my childhood, yet why have I remembered a cat? It is because I am connecting the two. Why would I connect this animal with a cat from my past when I could just as easily connect it with maybe that little dog that is the same size, shape, and color that lives next door that I saw yesterday? Why is it that I don't compare it to just anything that is the same size and shape? I must make the comparison. Did we lose power? Are we okay? Okay. I must make the comparison with another cat based on a standard. Even granting that, meeting cat number 2, I recall cat number 1, I must make the comparison. Why am I doing that? I must liken cat number 2 to cat number 1 and find them similar by a standard. To liken something is to intentionally compare it. So I must draw forth from my memory another cat to compare this one to. I am making that selection from my memory. If a dog runs up, I'm going to make the selection of a dog to compare it to. That choice is mine. I am making it according to a standard. Okay. And what is the standard? The standard is the concept cat, the third cat we talked about, the ideal platonic ideal cat, the concept cat, which the intelligible form that they say does not exist. Okay. The standard is the concept cat. I do not mean to suggest that there is an explicit or even an unconscious inference involved here every time I recognize a cat as a cat. So she is saying, I do not mean to suggest that what I am doing is explicitly thinking, what kind of thing is this like? This is very much like a cat I saw as a child. That would be explicitly making the comparison. She says, I'm not doing that, nor am I even unconsciously doing that. In the blink of an eye, quickly saying, oh, what's it like? What's it like? Yes, it's like a cat that I saw when I was small. She says, I do not mean to suggest that that is the process. That is not the process, she would say. But as my world is colored, so too it is cat inhabited, which means my reality contains cats, and so I recognize them. My reality contains trees, so I recognize them. My reality contains airplanes, so I recognize them. A person 500 years ago would look at an airplane flying across the sky and think it was a kind of bird, because their world contained birds. But my world contains airplanes, and it contains cats. I recognize them because it is part of human psychology. and the human mind to recognize and interact with the world directly. Okay. So it is not an explicit comparison to a memory of a cat, nor is it an unconscious comparison. It is a recognition. Okay. My world is cat inhabited, just like it's colored. And at the same time, structured through language. Let me give you another linguistic tidbit from my background in linguistics. Language is the operating system of the brain, the OS of the brain. If you have an excellent computer and you do not have an operating system language, you cannot run the computer. The operating system is what interprets all the programs and all the data and enables the computer to function and integrate all of the information to do what you need it to do. There are cases in linguistic history of language deprivation in early childhood, where babies are raised without a first language, up until the age of 6 or 7. If that occurs, the human being will be retarded and handicapped for life, because a person cannot think without language. Now, much of our language is without words, language at the speed of thought. Thought at light speed, which we don't have time to put words to. Yet, the first thing that catches up is the words for maintaining our memories and structuring our thoughts. I personally knew a case of a child that was language deprived in his early childhood. He was not raised with any language. And at the age of 6, he could not count with one-to-one correspondence. He could not do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 objects on the table. He couldn't do that. He went like this. He could say, after speech therapy, he could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and he could point, but it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He could not associate things in the real world with the concept of numbers in a way to be able to count concrete objects, because in the formative stages of his brain, he was deprived of language, and the brain did not develop in a way that was able to interface between the real world and the conceptual world. So when Marjorie Green says, "My world is structured through language," she is technically correct from a linguistic standpoint and from a biological standpoint. Our perception of reality, the way our brain works, the way our brain enables us to interface with the real concrete world around us, is through language. It's through naming things. And I can recognize this as a microphone, even though I have seen other microphones that look very different. For example, the microphone on my computer is just a little hole in the casing. Can't see it at all except for as a little hole. That's a microphone. And I have held microphones like this, or I've seen them clipped, or perhaps just a little wire. The Humean empiricist would say that I remember something looked like that was a microphone. Yet they all look very different, completely different, and I recognize them all as microphones. That is intelligible form that the empiricists would say does not exist. But Marjorie Green says our world is peopled by microphones and structured by language. And I must have a name for the intelligible form so that I can recognize all the different manifestations of one thing, which is a microphone. So, my world is colored, so too it is cat inhabited, and at the same time structured through language. I dwell in a coherent and mutually interacting framework of word classes and thing classes. Okay. I dwell. Dwell means live, and it means more than live. I thrive. I live fully. Dwell means to live fully, richly. I dwell in a coherent, mutually interacting framework of word classes and thing classes. Now, the empiricists would have us believe that we ourselves are nothing more than a chaotic, random, accidental association of atoms, chemicals, that happen to be here right now with the illusion of consciousness. We evolved by random chance, and we're just a heap of molecules, a heap of atoms. And that light is random energy, and that air is random molecules of gases, and that everything we see, the order we see, is really an illusion because it's all accidental. However, we do not perceive reality that way. We perceive reality as coherent. Coherent. And is this coherence a mere function of my brain? I impose order on what is actually a bunch of random stimuli, and my brain imposes the order? Is that what is happening? Or is there order in the outside universe which my brain rightly perceives? Because my brain is a well-functioning machine that takes in the light onto the retina and the colors and the shapes and turns it into an image of what actually exists. So the order is not only in my brain. As a function of my brain, the order is actually existent. The order exists whether I am here to perceive it or not. Is order and coherence intrinsic to the universe? Or is the universe random operations interacting to produce occasional and coincidental results? That's what science would say. But anyway, Marjorie Green says, I dwell in a coherent system, a coherent and mutually interacting framework. The word mutually implies that there's more than one thing interacting. In this case, two things, which are interacting mutually, cooperating. Coherent, mutually interacting framework. That's a structure of word classes and thing classes. So I have all this verbal stuff: cat, dog. This is the range of sounds, which means dog. I could say dog. I could say dog. I could say you dog. You know, it sounds different, but it all goes in here. Microphone. Tree. Okay, here's my word classes and the sounds that I recognize as going into the class. And then, mutually, we have this is all the words. We have mutually interacting the framework of thing classes: cat, dog, microphone, tree. So this is the actual cat. This is the actual dog. Tail. This is the actual microphone. This one looks like this. This is the actual tree. They interact together. This framework and this framework, mutually interacting. I dwell in a coherent, mutually interacting framework of word classes and thing classes. Only within such a frame do individual sounds, cat, or written shapes, cat, and individual animals, my cat, Olavo's cat, the cat that lives on the street, become what they are. It's only in the framework of being named and being recognized do they become the individual that they are with all of their dignity and depth. The power to generalize, which speech demands, is the power to sort out, according to effective norms, both utterances and natural events. So we have two things: the power to generalize. So I know that this is a tree, and there are also 100 other kinds of trees. All the trees fit in. That's generalizing. The power to do that is the power to sort out and say, okay, these things are trees, but that's a bush, that's a blade of grass, that's a mushroom, this is an amoeba or a single cellular fungus. You know, in other words, it's the ability to sort out and say this is not that. Okay? All of these are trees. I am generalizing. And because I'm able to generalize that these are trees, I am also able to sort out that these trees are not the same as bushes or blades of grass or single cellular fungi. So the ability to generalize and the ability to exclude, to include and to exclude, which speech demands. Both verbally, I have to be able to hear the difference between cat and cot, and I also have to be able to hear that cat and cat are the same, even though they have significant linguistic differences. Okay, generalize and sort out. These powers the power to generalize, which speech demands, is the power to sort out according to effective norms, both utterances and natural events. The effective norms from a verbal utterance perspective is what I told you about the babies with the mother tongue and the mother teaching them where the meaningful sounds begin and end. That's the power with the mother tongue. But more interestingly for philosophy is the ability to sort out natural events: cat, dog, tree. by means of effective norms. What is the essential? What are the notes? Logically speaking, what are the notes? What in the Porphyrian tree, what are the essential characteristics that makes a cat and not a dog? Or, if you want to speak intuitively, what is the intelligible form that exists in your mind and in the mind of everybody who knows what a cat is? How do we do that? Those are the effective norms. Shall we go on, or shall we stop there? Okay, we're going to break now. If you have any questions, send them in. Okay, the first thing I want to clarify for you is that I referred to the Porphyrian tree. And the Porphyrian tree is a construct that was originated by a philosopher named Porphyry, who was in maybe the 2nd or 3rd century AD, a Neoplatonist who wrote an introduction to Aristotle's categories. And he developed the Porphyrian tree as a way for students of logic to comprehensively describe something. And I'm going to have to erase this to give you an example of it. But that's the spelling if you want to look it up online. This method fell out of favor, and people have not been learning about this in the schools for at least 100 years. But the homeschoolers have resurrected classical education. So that's why I know about this and have taught my children logic using this as part of a foundation. So the way it works is you start at the top with a category like substance. And this is the trunk of the tree. There will be several categories. Alessandro, do you have them?
Yeah.
Substance.
Body.
Body.
Animal.
Animal.
Man.
No, there was something about sensate, or...
Uh,
Oh, no, that's here. Okay, animal. Man is after that?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the last one, right? And then off to the two sides, this is the trunk of the tree. Off to the two sides, you have branches. On one side, and it divides in a binary manner. At each level, the thing you're trying to describe is either this or this. Okay, so for substance, it could be immaterial, or material. For body, it could be, what are the two there?
Living and non-living.
Living. We're having a problem here again.
Yeah.
And non-living. And then for animal, it's either
Rational or
irrational. I think I put this one wrong. Actually, I believe this one should have been non-living. The negative ones are over here, and the positive ones end up being over here. Irrational and rational. And then with man, it was what?
Man was...
It was it Adam and Eve?
Adam and Eve.
Okay.
Male, female.
Yeah, male and female. Eve, Adam. You take whatever you're trying to categorize, and you begin at the top with substance. Is it material or immaterial? If it goes off to the right, it ends, dead end. For instance, if I'm talking about the concept of courage, it is an immaterial substance, period. It's said to have two notes, two characteristics. However, if it goes this way and it's material, then you go down one. So maybe I'm not talking about courage, maybe I'm talking about a man, George Washington. So maybe we should have said male and female. George Washington. Well, as to substance, he is material. So since it goes to the left, we go down. As to body, he is living. Non-living would be, it has a body, but it's maybe rock or something. Okay, we did miss something about sense. Well, anyway, so he's living. So if he's living, he must be an animal. Is he irrational or rational? Well, he's rational. Okay, so if he's rational, he must be a man. So, and then we probably should have ended with male and female. He's male. So then the categorization would be he is a male, rational, living, material substance. That's how the Porphyrian tree works. Okay, we'll leave that. Now we have another question. The question was, what do I personally think of the Levis book now? Because I, at the beginning, thought Olavo's choice was very questionable because the book was so difficult. I will say that I like it now. I have benefited greatly from this study. Not only this book, but all the study that I have done in order to understand this book has broadened my perceptions greatly. And I have grown in my philosophical understanding, in my understanding of the world and reality. Also, I had never heard of F.R. Levis before this, but now I've seen his name in other places, and he has been compared to other intellectual greats that I do appreciate. A contemporary of his in the same college was C.S. Lewis, and his name is coupled with C.S. Lewis and others. So I'm grateful to make the acquaintance of F.R. Levis. So I think it was a good choice. And I think the pace we're going gives the opportunity for a lot of thought and reflection. So I'm enjoying it a lot. I hope you are too. Are there any other? Another question.
Okay, Margarita, great class. I got a one question. We know your opinion about TV at home, but I would like to know your opinion about the internet.
The question is, we know your opinion about TV at home, but I'm interested in your opinion about the internet. I think, now again, I am speaking about children. Adults, every adult has 24 hours in the day. Let's get rid of this board. That way we'll not be distracted by you wondering when the board will actually fall. Okay, every adult has 24 hours in every day, and he is responsible to God for how he uses this time. And I have a friend who is a woman, and her life is out of control. Her family has debt, lots of financial debt. The house itself is messy and dirty, and There's stacks of books and papers and stuff and laundry and a feeling of disorder in the home. And she spends many hours in the day on the internet playing games, on the computer with computer-based games. And it's her way of avoiding her life. I've seen a number of young adults, especially men, young men, who spend many hours every day on the computer avoiding their life. I've known a number of young men who have lost their jobs and lost their marriages because they prefer to be on the computer. It's a way of hiding from the struggle to grow that is demanded by life. Life is hard, and people would rather retreat and hide, and maybe it almost sedates you or it's like taking a drug so that you don't feel the pain. I think that time on the computer can be that. It can be a time waster. However, I think the internet is also a great resource and tool to bring people together and to make dissemination of information possible in a way that it never has been before. So I don't say that it is evil or universally bad, but I do say that it can be abused, like alcohol or drugs or gambling or anything that gobbles up all your time, takes all your time, that you should be using for something else, something more important and more valuable and maybe more godly in the long run. As far as children go, I think it would be better up till the age of 12 to have probably very little access to internet. For adolescents, 12 to 20, you have a huge problem of pornography. So huge as to be almost inescapable. And for an adolescent, I believe this to be very damaging. For children under 12, I believe that to be on the computer, it is also addictive. Like TV is addictive. It's something that sucks you in and takes all your time. And what a child needs is to grow. And it will stop their intellectual growth or stunt it, in my opinion. And it's not everyone who will be sucked in. But if you have a child who is not prone to becoming addicted, then there's no problem. But a lot of kids will be playing with the computer so many hours and they will not be doing other things. And personally, I think that for them to develop as well-rounded, skilled individuals, it would be better for them to do other things. So what we did in our family was we didn't give the children any internet access at all before about the age of 12. We had no video games, but we did have educational software that they were allowed to play as a reward for doing work. Like, if you get your room clean, you can play on the computer for a while. But the only choices for playing were math games or writing stories or illustrating with art programs or something which made them work intellectually. There was no mindless video games. And I found that they were willing to do almost anything to get an hour of educational software because the medium itself is so addictive. So that's what I think about computers. Did that answer the question? Any more questions before we sign off?
Yes, thanks. It answers the question, and we have no more questions.
Okay. No more questions, and we'll see you next week. And I think you should do some copying. Try to do some copying of great literature this week. And maybe you'll come up with some interesting imagery or language that we can talk about next week.